Wonderful Wizard of Oz Part 5, last 20 pages. I'm going to start off by saying that Henry Littlefield, the person who published the original analysis of the political allegory in The Wizard of Oz, he didn't really talk about anything past where the movie ends, their sort of last time that they're in the Emerald City. So everything I'm going to say about political allegory from here on out throughout the whole Wizard of Oz series is a combination of different opinions that I've seen and my own speculation. So take it all with a grain of salt. I also want to say that there was one more thought I had about the Cowardly Lion knocking over the church in Dainty China Country with his tail. So William Jennings Bryan was a fundamentalist Christian, like I mentioned in the description of my last video. And this kind of makes me think that L. Frank Baum did have a negative opinion of fundamentalist Christians. The Wizard of Oz, after it came out, was banned in a lot of areas and a lot of schools because it featured a lot of female characters, and also it talked about there being good witches. And that almost feels like the idea of witches having the potential to be good. It may have been, in some respects, an intentional attack on fundamentalist Christians, saying that everything is not what you think, any kind of power can be used for good. So I am sort of leaning more towards that interpretation now rather than what I said before. Where we left off, the gang is heading into Quadling Country. When they get there, Quadling Country is sort of guarded by this big rocky hill, and behind every one of the rocks is one of these hammerhead guys. They're called hammerheads because their necks do this. They extend their necks and knock people down the hill with their heads to guard it. Now, if these dudes look vaguely familiar and you have seen the Wicked musical, it's probably because they actually make a small appearance. So if you saw them going across the stage and you were like, what is that? And then they just don't explain it at all, that's why it's an Easter egg for the book. They end up being able to go around the hammerheads with the help of the winged monkeys. So Dorothy calls on them with the golden cap for the last time, and then they are able to carry her over the hill into Quadling Country and drop her off. Now, I was not able to find very much about what the hammerheads could have represented. They're not covered by a lot of people, but one opinion that I did see said that they represented kind of hard-headed people living in rural Appalachia. And I find that idea interesting because of something I'll get to in a minute. They go through Quadling Country, and like I mentioned way back, Quadling Country is primarily red. So the fences, the houses are red, the people are all dressed in red, and it talks about the red showing bright against the green grass and the yellowing grain. Now again, I was able to find very little information about what the Quadlings are supposed to represent, but I have a pretty good idea. So if you think of the colors red against green, and then the colors red against gold and yellow, that makes me think of the Spanish and Mexican flags. And this book was written around the time of the Spanish-American War, a little after, and as a result of the Spanish-American War, the U.S. acquired territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, stuff like that. And in the Mexican-American War, that essentially created the Republic of Texas, which was later annexed into the United States in 1845, I want to say. So I think that Quadling Country is meant to represent kind of Texas and the Deep South, and also maybe the Caribbean, these areas that were previously under Mexican or Spanish control. They finally make it to Glinda, who is described as a woman with a white dress, red hair, and blue eyes. Unlike the Good Witch of the North, who is older, she is eternally young. Now, the Good Witches of the North and the South are meant to represent the Northern and Southern Farmers' Alliances, who sort of supported the populist movement, springboarded it to popularity. I'm not 100% sure why Glinda is described as being so much younger than the Good Witch of the North, but if we are saying that Quadling Country in part represents Texas, which was annexed pretty recently compared to a lot of the other states in the US at the time, then I think that would explain why she's portrayed as being younger. Now here's where the flying monkeys come back. So she says, great, I will get you back to Kansas, but you have to give me the golden cap. Dorothy says, no problem. But this means that the flying monkeys, who again were meant to represent Native Americans, they have been transferred to the South. And if the hammerheads represent rural Appalachia, then they would have had to essentially pass through rural Appalachia and go to the south, which makes me think of the Trail of Tears, because the Cherokee Nation was in kind of Appalachia and then was moved farther south, kind of southwest. And then what Glinda does is she uses the flying monkeys all 3 times. She sends the Scarecrow back to the Emerald City to rule there. She sends the Tin Woodman to the Vinkus to rule over the Winkies. And then she sends the Cowardly Lion back to the forest to rule over all of the animals there. And then she gives the Golden Cap back to the King of the Flying Monkeys so that they can be free. Now, I think this represents the Indian Appropriations Act of 1851, which established Native American reservations. This did limit the amount of kind of hunting, crops they could grow, stuff like that Native Americans could do. But I think based on his views on Native Americans, L. Frank Baum would have viewed this as a good thing, would have viewed the establishment of reservations to be a positive development in the lives of Native Americans, even though it was not positive for many Native Americans. They were forced to move to these reservations, were restricted to that land, and yeah, just wasn't great overall. There's also a pretty damning quote here about the state of the economy and life for a lot of farmers. Dorothy explains her plight to Glinda and says, "My greatest wish now is to get back to Kansas, for Aunt Em will surely think something dreadful has happened to me, and that will make her put on mourning, and unless the crops are better this year than they were last, I am sure Uncle Henry cannot afford it." So her biggest concern is that if she's missing for too much longer, her family will mourn her and they cannot afford her funeral, which is something that I've seen echoed on social media in the past decade or so that I've been on Twitter, is people saying, yeah, I'm literally too broke to die. Like, I can't saddle my family with that. Anyway, Glinda says, oh, you had the power all along. All you have to do is click your heels 3 times and go back to Kansas. Notably, there's no place like home. She says, take me home to Aunt Em. She goes back to Kansas, losing the silver shoes in the process, which I think sort of means that after the populist movement kind of fell off, William Jennings Bryan lost the presidential election for the 3rd time. A lot of the people who supported populism kind of went home. It fell off. It ultimately failed. The silver shoes, the silver standard did not end up making it through to Washington. But yeah, she makes it back home. All is well, and she is finally home again.